Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back to another chapter 13 conversation. We are looking still at our cross section or transverse cut of our spinal cord. So remember, our spinal cord has a cone shape. So think of maybe an ice cream cone. And here we're looking at, that fatter end that's more kind of cylinder in shape. It hasn't come to that point yet. And remember, we have gray matter at the center of the spinal cord, and it can be described maybe as looking like a letter H or looking like a butterfly, where you have maybe the body of the butterfly at the center, and then you have the wings spread out on either side. The topic for this particular video is looking at the white matter. And so let's begin by actually naming our different pieces of our white matter. So when we are talking about the white matter, we see that it's surrounding sort of the outside of that gray matter, sort of circulating around that butterfly, right? And what we're going to do is actually divide it up into what we can call columns. So I'm sort of drawing like a dashed line here so that it can see what would be called my anterior white column. And then I'm sort of doing a dashed line to indicate the side view would be called the lateral white column. And then that would leave the area sort of at the back. I'm going to change that a little bit as being the posterior white column. And so I'm labeling this on just one half of the model, which you could label this equally on both sides. So what we're seeing again is this white matter is kind of making this circle around the gray matter, and we divide the white matter up into what are called columns, and we're basically doing this here by direction. So we have the chunk of white matter at the front is called the anterior white column, and the chunk of white matter on the side is called the lateral white column, and so then the chunk of white matter at the back is called the posterior white column. And what we're going to see is that these columns are composed of tracks. So the columns are composed of tracks. And the track here, remember, is a specific term. So we've talked before. All right, so I had to do a pause while my washing machine made tons of noise. So I hope it wasn't too distracting before. We were talking about tracks, and I was just reminding you all that our definition of a track is a bundle of axons, specifically in the central nervous system. And so remember again, how many times have we said it? We can just keep saying it, because repetition always helps. When we're talking about axons, myelinated axons, we're talking about those fiber optic cables, right? This is like that transmission of information. And so when we talk about tracks, we can divide them up into either ascending or descending. An ascending track is going to be carrying sensory information. And so that means it's going to be information collected from the body and making its way to the brain. Whereas your descending track is going to have motor information, and that means it's going to be coming from the brain and making its way out to the body. Let's actually go back to this definition of tracks, and let's add in just a few more details. So not only is it a bundle of axons in the central nervous system, but we also see that it's going to carry the same type of information. I've sort of mentioned this in a way before, that the kind of magical thing about the nervous system is it's just organized. And because the same information is traveling kind of in the same way every time, it allows us to have these maps, right? And so the track is carrying the same type of information. It's at about the same speed and it's in the same direction. And here, when we're talking about the direction, we're talking about whether it's an ascending or a descending track. Now, when we look at our ascending tracks, we're going to see that they are located in all three columns. So we're going to find ascending tracks in the anterior, lateral, and posterior white columns. When we look at the descending tracks, we're going to find these just located in the anterior and lateral white column. So kind of like our takeaway here at this point is that the posterior white column is just sensory information. And this should connect in with the idea of that posterior gray horn. So let's actually go to our diagram for just a minute. And what we're going to see is our sensory information always is traveling into, let me redraw that. So our sensory information is always coming into our posterior gray horn, moving into that posterior column, and then it can make its way up to the brain. Key thing I'm trying to relate here is that sensory information is always coming into the back of the spinal cord. Now, remember, we do have sensory tracks in both the lateral and the white column. So some of that information will go to lateral white column before it goes up, or it can go to the anterior white column before it goes up. So we'll see that in each case. But sensory information, remember, is coming into the back. All right, now we of course do more anatomy with this model in our lab, so make sure you're picking up those details. And as always, stay tuned for next video and take care of yourselves and each other.